I'm Mark Golub. Welcome to a special edition of In the News, as I'm joined at this table by three individuals who will be weighing in on a topic in the news which somewhat surprisingly has received very little media attention and has hardly generated any response from the Jewish community. The issue in the news is a letter signed by more than 100 Democratic members of Congress and sent to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, criticizing the Trump administration for stating that American foreign policy recognizes there is nothing illegal about Israeli settlements on what's normally referred to as the West Bank, what we call here the West Ridge, since most of the territory is on a mountain range overlooking the state of Israel. And it's what many traditional Jews call Judea and Samaria, since those are the biblical Jewish names for this land going back more than 3,000 years to the days of the kings of Israel. But whatever you call the land west of the Jordan River, since 1967, when Israel took control of the land in a defensive war against Jordan, when at the time there was no international recognition of Jordan's right to that land. Ever since the Six-Day War of 1967, Israel's presence on the West Ridge has been a bone of serious contention and constant criticism. And Israel's establishment of communities and towns on the West Ridge have been considered by many to be illegal and an obstacle to peace, and a violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention, although nothing related to Israeli control of the West Ridge has anything to do with the import of the Fourth Geneva Convention. And so after Donald Trump announced the United States does not view Israeli communities to be illegal, Congressman Andy Levin of Michigan sponsored a letter criticizing this State Department decision and also suggesting the administration had engaged in other inappropriate acts, including recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, the closing of the Palestinian mission in Washington, halting U.S. aid to the Palestinians on the West Bank and in Gaza. And remember, the Trump administration is refusing to fund the Palestinian Authority so long as it promotes pay for slay, the practice of supporting the families of those who murder Israeli civilians. Congressman Levin's letter goes on to say that the Trump administration has severely damaged prospects for peace and has endangered the security of America, of Israel, and of the Palestinian people. And some 107 House Democrats have signed this letter, including 7 Jewish members of Congress. Now, I want to be clear regarding what this edition of In the News is all about. It's very important you, our viewing audience, understand what we're trying to do here on JBS. JBS has a bias. There's nothing strange or unusual about this fact. Today, there's virtually no no news channel that does not have a bias, whether it's CNN or MSNBC or Fox or the networks. The only difference is they pretend they have none. They present themselves to us as unbiased, as classic journalists who only report the news, neither slant it nor make it. In reality, that journalism is dead in America. American television channels are now advocates of a very definite position and persuasion. And again, the real shame is they're not honest about it. JBS has a bias. JBS is an attempt to counter the inappropriate, irrational, false, and sometimes hateful attacks on the State of Israel. It is to simply say that JBS is pro-Israel. That's too simple. Of course, JBS is pro-Israel. Within the pro-Israel community, of course, there's a wide variety of opinion. That opinion, left and right, is seen and heard on JBS. It's not about being pro-Israel. It's about JBS being a proud voice on the American scene, dedicated to telling the truth about Israel and about everything. And I know that there are those of you watching JBS right now, you love JBS, and you love the state of Israel. And yet there are many of you who are made to feel uncomfortable about Israeli policy. Made to feel uncomfortable when Donald Trump moves the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, or when he recognizes Israel's right to the Golan Heights, or when he acknowledges that Israeli communities on the West Ridge are not illegal. And what I hope JBS can do for you, for any fair-minded individual, is correct misconceptions and try as best as possible to put things into factual and honest perspective. And this does not mean that everyone must agree with Israel's policies or communities on the West Ridge or with any Trump administration policy regarding Israel. But it does mean that the facts and the truth have an integrity that should be respected. And that's what I hope this special edition of In the News does. This is not a L'chaim roundtable where we have people with very different opinions on Jewish issues. On this edition of In the News, I'm being joined by three articulate voices on the world Jewish scene, all of whom feel, as I do, that the criticism expressed in the letter to Secretary Pompeo is itself inappropriate. And I believe you'll hear a consensus that we are thrilled that the United States has recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, finally. That the United States refuses to support Palestinians pay for slay. And we're thrilled that the U.S. State Department has finally acknowledged there's nothing illegal in Israeli communities on the West Ridge. And then I'll ask my guests to address the arguments made against all of these U.S. policies. And I also want you to hear their opinions of why there's been an eerie quiet among major Jewish organizations in response to the Trump administration's dramatic and significant policy change. And with that said, let me introduce my guests to you on this edition of In the News. Sitting next to me, as always, is the award-winning novelist, a law professor whose forthcoming book is entitled Saving Free Speech from Itself. Thane Rosenbaum, distinguished university professor at Touro College and a columnist for JNS, the Jewish News Syndicate. Mort Klein is the national president of one of the oldest pro-Israel organizations in America, the ZOA, the Zionist Organization of America. And representing an Israeli perspective, we're joined by Benjamin Anthony, the founder of Our Soldiers Speak, an organization that explains who and what the men and women of the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF, are all about. He's also co-founder of Miriam, the Miriam Institute, a New York think tank. And Benjamin Anthony is now hosting his own series on JBS, Israel Briefing, seen on Tuesday evenings at 7 p.m. New York time. I welcome all three of you. Thank you for making time for me and for JBS. By the way, just for the record, we invited many people, men and women, including those who are very critical of the Trump policy, to be part of this program. Look, JBS is not CNN. All of them, including members of Congress who signed the letter to Secretary Pompeo, all said they were unavailable. Maybe next time. Anyway, thank you all for being here. And I want to begin by doing what I just said I was going to do in the audience, and Thane, I begin with you. First of all, I want you to express when you learned of Donald Trump's change of a U.S. policy, saying that no, Israeli settlements, communities, towns, almost cities on the West Bank, that they are not illegal. What was your instinctive, immediate response?
Well, Mark, first of all, I responded like a law professor because I actually know the international legal issues here. In fact, I wrote an essay for JNS that your JBS watchers can go get at jns.org. Look, the question of the legality of the West Bank settlements, there's never been a legal determination. So when people at Shabbat dinner say stupid things like it's illegal, violates international law, the answer to that is no, it's not. There has not been any kind of a judicial pronouncement. There have been political statements. There have been United Nations resolutions. But aside from an International Court of Justice and advisory opinion, this is an issue that has been open. In the United States alone, the original opinion that what Pompeo is essentially disavowing, all it said from 1978 was that the settlements are not consistent with international law. That's not the way to say it violates international law. That's the language that Pompeo is saying. That's confusing language. It doesn't mean that language. And we don't regard the settlements as per se illegal. That's all he was saying. And in many ways, he was speaking to a reality, which is that if you looked at this in a critical way, you can't conclude that they're illegal. They're not illegal. And the State Department didn't ever rule that it was illegal. And by the way, Ronald Reagan, 3 years after the 1978 advisory opinion from the State Department, Ronald Reagan said it wasn't illegal. And since that time, U.S. presidents have wavered back and forth. Most of the time, they just ducked the question.
Yes.
They didn't want to talk about it.
Yes.
And then we got to the point where, over the last 10 years or so, what you heard them say is, well, they're not helpful. The settlements are not helpful if we're trying to achieve a two-state solution. But again, the words legality, it was rarely invoked until Pompeo actually established a new principle, which is to say they're not illegal.
Okay, take one half step back. How do you explain to our audience what happened at the United Nations at the end of Barack Obama's second term?
Well, that's an interesting point, and I'm glad you're bringing that up, Mark. I would actually say that what Pompeo did was to undo something that the United States had done 3 years ago that was unforgivable. And I'm still taking names. Everyone in the Obama administration, Samantha Powers, all of you, I have never forgotten this betrayal. The United Nations Security Council, the United States historically vetoed resolutions that came through the Security Council that prejudiced Israel, had a long history of doing so. In this one instance, with respect to UN Resolution 2334, the United States abstained. And that resolution was radioactive. It said things that had never been said before, and this is what it said. It said that Israeli settlements are a flagrant violation of international law.
That's right.
That's very strong language.
Right.
That language never been missing.
Including Jerusalem.
Right, including Jerusalem, that includes the Kotel as well, let's remember. And then it said, and has no legal validity, as if saying that it was a flagrant violation of international law wasn't enough. They just threw it, oh yes, and it has no legal validity. President Obama is a law professor before he was a president at some point. He must have known the legal significance of what he's saying, because the fact that it was actually talking about the land pre-1967, everyone knows that after 1967, with Resolution 242, Oslo, that everyone understood that Israel was going to eventually retain some portion of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and certainly the Kotel. Everyone and their sister knows that, President Obama. So why would you abstain from a resolution that, first of all, is patently legally false, to say that they're a flagrant violation of international law and has no legal validity, and says that all of it that means everything that Israel had conquered in 1967, to the extent to which Israel is there now, is unlawful. When in fact, he himself, President Obama, always talked about land swaps. Whenever you hear the word land swaps, you know what that means? It means there's a recognition that a large portion or some portion of the West Bank is going to remain part of Israel proper.
And explain, by abstaining, why was that significant?
Well,
in the past, what had Israel, what had the United States
the
always
United
done?
States has historically voted against.
It had vetoed.
Vetoed it.
Right.
The veto. The abstention instead of the veto was an incredible stab in the back. If President Obama would use the phrase, "I always have Israel's back," there's a knife in it, all right? The knife was put there by President Obama, and I want the JBS viewers to understand how significant that was. It was out of a United Nations security resolution that simply, for the first time, took the strongest, harshest language possible. That is, I am saying, legally incorrect. There's no basis in international law to take that position. And for the United States not to do what it would normally do, is to veto the resolution. They remained quiet. And by doing so, it passed.
Okay. As a law professor, I'm asking you, are the settlements, the communities that Israel builds on the West Ridge, West Bank, Judea Samaria, whatever you call them, are they being built on Palestinian land?
No. let me just say, no, of course not. In fact, I got something better for you, Mark. It's better than that. Ben probably knows this. The people who live in in the West Bank, who are settlers, Jewish settlers in the West Bank, they have these lovely houses with pools. Yeah, they might. But you know what? They don't have title to it. No one owns those houses. You want to know why? They're only leased. And the reason for that is the Israelis sort of respected the Geneva Convention, Article 49. And even though it doesn't apply in many ways, it respected the idea that this isn't really ours yet. It's still disputed.
It's disputed.
It's still subject to some permanent status negotiations, which is what Oslo was talking about. And so, yes, there are the settlements, there are Jews here, but they don't own the land. We're leasing it to them.
From who did they lease it from?
From Israel, as at this point, since they are essentially in charge of the territory, I'm not going to call it occupied, but they're in charge of the territory. And that because of the principle of Article 49 of the Geneva Convention, which says if you're an occupying power, which they're not, you have obligations to the citizens, the residents who live there. And one of the things is not to take away their property rights, right, which was your point, right? Those settlers have not taken Arab land because the Israelis, from the very position, the Israeli courts have imposed these rules to say, no, we're going to hold fast to the humanitarian principle of the Geneva Convention, and we're not going to let Jewish settlers own the land. They might eventually, because remember, we're talking about Area C. Area C is virtually all Jewish, and that in any two-state solution, should there be one, everyone knows that C would be part of Israel. There's no question. And the Arabs who live in C will become citizens of Israel.
Who's it no question to?
Well,
when you say no, is it no question to the Palestinians?
To the Palestinians, not. But even in the Obama administration, that's why I'm saying.
Okay.
Everyone else who was involved from the Clinton administration, the Oslo Accords, all the way through the Obama administration, everyone understood, except the Palestinians, because you're right, the real problem with the Palestinians is they don't recognize Tel Aviv as being part of Israel. They don't recognize Haifa. That's the problem. And that, by the way, I don't want to take up too much time right this moment, but I think this is really one of the real dangers of what these Congress persons are doing. Because the Palestinians need to understand that their obligation under Oslo is to sit down and negotiate with the Israelis. They refuse to do that and have refused to do that. You know why? Because people like President Obama gave the false impression that, you know what, you just sit there and gnash your teeth and hold on to your keys that for the land that you think you're going to get. And eventually the world will impose this on Israel. Right? They'll leapfrog over Israel, and someone, the United Nations, will impose on Israel and maybe get rid of Israel. That's what they're holding out for, the end of Israel. This is the reason they don't negotiate. This is the reason why they turned back 4 other deals where they would get 98% of what they're asking for. If an entity isn't accepting 98% of what they're supposed to get for a state, you know what you're hearing, which is they don't want that state. That's the state they don't want. The state they want is Israel. They want the West Bank and all of Israel. It's the only reason why a people who are offered 98% of what they thought they were supposed to get walk away, and instead of saying, I'm coming back with a counteroffer, I'm going to come back with rockets. I'm going to come back with the second intifada. So what I would say, there's many things that were very troubling about this letter. But for me, I thought that one of the things that Trump has done, to his credit, is that he's giving the Palestinians serious, tough talk, or maybe tough love. No one did this before. Up until now, the strategy was tough talk to the Israelis. Show the Americans as being tough on the Israel. Obama lived for this. He woke up every day saying, how do I prove that I can be tough on the Israelis? And I want to make sure the Palestinians are comfortable. You can be comfortable. Fire your rockets. Stab Israelis in the throat if you need to do that. We know you have no impulse control. You have to kill people. We understand that.
Oh, you're not saying Obama was happy that any Palestinian was killing any Israelis.
I am saying that let me just tell you, to be clear, that resolution that you asked me to talk about, 2334, doesn't say anything about Palestinian violence.
Correct.
So what I'm saying to you is, all of the people in the Obama administration, when it came to Palestinian rejectionism, violence, terrorism, they didn't have much to say.
Correct.
So that may be true when I'm saying I'm hyperbolizing.
Yeah, there's hyperbole there.
But I am saying is he didn't seem upset that Jews were being stabbed outside the old city. He just seemed to be saying the focus needs to be on the settlements. Israel needs to do more, and God forbid we should ask the Palestinians to do anything. The difference with Trump is that he has changed the conversation and has said essentially to the Palestinians, implicitly, and I thought this is long overdue, do you want to be statesmen or do you want to be terrorists? Decide. Do you want to be nation builders or do you want to be thugs? What do you want? We want to deal with nation builders. You want to be a nation builder? We're with you. If you want to be a terrorist, if you want to pay families for killing Israelis, remember, this whole position was taken up because of the Taylor Force Act. Taylor Force wasn't Jewish. Taylor Force was an MBA student in Vanderbilt who went to visit Israel and was killed by one of the stabbing intifada. His father said, "What? You mean to say the person that killed my son is now his family's going to receive benefits, insurance, stipends, education allowances, bonuses, because a killing gets more?" That's what you said when you meant pay for slay. Mm-hmm. The more the crime is, the more your family benefits. The best job you could get in the West Bank right now is killing a Jew. That's the best job. It's better than a civil servant position because you may go to jail for sure, but the benefits are extraordinary. So I thought that in some ways, all of the things that the Trump administration have done have been singular in their focus. Tough talk to the Palestinians. Prove that you're not just terrorists, that you actually want a state, because the evidence doesn't seem to suggest that you actually want a state. It seems what you want is Israel not to have a state and a lot of dead Jews between the river and the sea.
Mm-hmm. Benjamin, you're an Israeli.
Yes.
So on the one hand, it's inappropriate for me to ask you what you think about American foreign policy. But at the same time, this policy affects you and affects people you love. So I want you to speak for a moment. How did you react when you heard that the Trump administration was now redefining, again, the word settlements, it just upsets me enormously. They're not settlements. They evoke the wrong picture in people's minds. If you go to the West Bank, there are towns and cities, and they're lovely. Imagine driving through rural New Jersey or Boca Raton, and you've got an Israeli community, which is called a settlement. Anyway, what the Trump administration has now said is they are not illegal. I want to know, number one, how you react to that, and I want to ask you the same question. When you hear people say that the West Bank is Palestinian land and that Israel is building communities on Palestinian land, as an Israeli, how do you react? And let me even change it a hair.
Sure.
I could have another Israeli here at this table who would say that Thane Rosenbaum is way over the top, and he would, I've heard Israeli intellectuals, Israeli writers write articles in the New York Times criticizing Israel for building on Palestinian land. I want you to speak to that for me.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And I want to just take a moment to thank you, Thane, for all that you do, and thank you, Mort Klein, for everything that you do, and of course you, Mark, and this channel. It's greatly appreciated as an Israeli, and you should hear that from me as an Israeli. With regard to your question, Mark, I just want to put a quick caveat out there. First of all, it's not inappropriate to ask me. It's perfectly reasonable to ask me. And the reason that I think it's justifiable and appropriate is that I'm not here wading into whether a president should tweet or not, or into the issue of gun violence, or whether an NFL player should take a knee, or any of that, or the composition of the Supreme Court. These are not my issues, and were I to sit here, I would probably be a very unwelcomed guest, destined to follow in the footsteps of Piers Morgan, if you know who that is. But I'm not here speaking about that. I'm here speaking about a matter that directly pertains to the Jewish story and to the Jewish state. And the Jewish state is the one in which I live. It's the one for which I fought. It's the one in which I vote. It's the one in which I pay taxes. It's the one for which I want to see a bright future. And I think that we've come to a very, very difficult point in time when we have the Secretary of State for the United States of America making headlines by stating what frankly is the blindingly obvious, a simple truth. Incidentally, in my judgment, and I'm not a lawyer by training at all, but in my judgment, something that is not controversial in the most remote of sense. He simply says that they are not per se illegal. He leaves it wide open to question. He caveats what he says by expressing that the Israeli courts, as Thane has alluded to in his comments, the Israeli courts will ultimately decide the legality or illegality of these communities, and they are communities. So the fact that something like that is greeted with massive applause from the pro-Israel organizations and the pro-Israel community, both domestically in Israel and overseas throughout the diaspora, really is indicative of the fact that we've moved into a territory and a time whereby basic points are seen as exceptional. That's the first thing that I want to say about it. The second thing that I would say about it is I actually greeted the news and the statement with somewhat of a bittersweet attitude. And again, it comes back to me being an Israeli. I think it's very, very sad and very disappointing that time and again I find representatives of other governments talking about what should be the ultimate outcome of Israel's position in Judea and Samaria with regard to the Gaza Strip, with regard to the Golan Heights, with regards to Jerusalem. And quite frankly, Mark, as a voter, I would like to see my government stand up and express where it's going on these issues, what does it want to do with these matters, speak about Israel's communities in those terms as communities, not settlements, because they are not settlements. Settlements is a dreadful misnomer. It conjures up in the minds of the listener and the reader and the consumer the idea that these are mere tents pitched on hillsides in a very ad hoc, haphazard manner. That's not the case. These are communities, exactly as you've described. And I'd like, frankly, to see my government put forward a strategy for Israel's presence there, one way or the other. Incidentally, the government doesn't have to be a government that aligns with my opinions. It can be a government that completely contradicts my opinions, but I want to know what the government stands for. And I think that the more and more the Israeli government cedes the ground on taking the initiative and declaring where it wants to be, ought to be, should be, and so on and so forth, the more and more we're going to see foreign representatives or representatives of foreign governments wading into the conversation.
And Benjamin, you feel that Israeli governments
Yes.
have ceded things by not being clear enough about what they want to do with these
Absolutely, categorically. And just before I go on to that and express why that's the case, in my judgment at least, let me tell you what the danger is. The danger is that today it's Secretary of State Mike Pompeo making a statement that expresses that Israeli communities are not per se illegal, or in his words, Israeli settlements, I think, are not per se illegal. Tomorrow it will be a different Secretary of State. Tomorrow, I actually believe it will be a Secretary of State, I don't mean literally tomorrow, but whether it be 2020 or 2024, Mark, there's going to be an enormous pendulum swing when it comes to the political discourse about the State of Israel here in the United States of America. And when that swing comes, I would not be at all surprised to find a Secretary of State for a government that has at its helm a democratic president, speaking to precisely the opposite and more, and more. And that's why the Israeli government must take the lead on putting forth what its position actually is on these issues. And just to qualify so that you know that I'm not merely stating something without it being historically accurate, we've just gone to elections. That's a subject in and of itself, which I think actually has relevance to this. But one of the things that you'll notice is there was a very real challenge before the Israeli electorate to decide what the incumbent versus the opposition are for on this issue, right? You have Prime Minister Netanyahu, who doesn't really say too much in terms of what he wants the end goal to be. And then you have Kahol Lavan, blue and white, helmed by Benny Gantz, and you have no idea what his view is on this. Not only do you have no idea what his view is, but you have no idea what Gantz's view is. You have no idea what Ya'alon's view is. You do not know what Lapid's view is, and you don't know what Gabi Ashkenazi's view is. These are senior members, with the exception of Lapid, within the Israeli security establishment. And Ya'alon is a seasoned politician in the State of Israel now, having been Minister of Defense and Prime Minister Netanyahu when he was with the Likud party. So that's the moment at hand. Prior to that, we've never had anybody state clearly what it is that they want to do.
Why is that so?
I think because there has been too ready a willingness to stay silent when actually clear speech and designated strategy is the order of the day.
Why is there a decision to stay silent?
Because I think that exactly what Thane's spoken about is something that the Israelis have looked to as being favorable, which is the notion that the United States of America will have our back within the United Nations, will have our back diplomatically, will have our back in terms of military aid. But I, as an Israeli, who spends not an insignificant amount of time here in the United States of America, I am very concerned about that, and I don't think that that's a sure thing at all. And I'm not sure that the Israelis back home are seeing just how quick a pace this picture is changing. It's changing faster than we care to imagine. And to add one layer of complexity to it, if there is a sea change, and if that sea change should be that there is language towards the State of Israel that is adversarial within the plank of the Democratic Party, they will have the Tudat Kashrut, the kosher certification that is afforded them by way of the fact that a great many American Jews vote for that party. And that will make it very difficult for the State of Israel to stand fast and designate these policies as challenging. And I'm concerned about it. I also want to just add one more point that I think is oftentimes lost. I spend a lot of time with Jews who vote for the Democratic Party. These are not anti-Israel people. These are people who, frankly, cleave to the Democratic Party, in my judgment, having conversed with them at length. Because, first of all, traditionally they've done so. Secondly, the policies of the party resonate with them, separate to the issues of the State of Israel.
Absolutely.
And thirdly, they actually find it very, very troubling to reconcile their own standards and their own beliefs and their own outlooks with the practice of politics that is the order of the day of the current President of the United States, whether that be tweets. Again, you read them as I read them, your viewers see them as I see them, but they find that very, very difficult to reconcile themselves with. And so they're at once troubled by the tweets and the expressions and so on and so forth of the incumbent, but they're also very, very troubled, many of them, not all, they're very troubled by what they are seeing coming out of the Democratic Party. This letter to Mike Pompeo being indicative of what troubles these Democrats here in the United States who are of the Jewish faith. And I actually think that the letter is good in that sense. I think it's positive that it was sent, and I think it's positive.
In what way?
Because it's a wake-up call. This is not an insignificant number of Democrats who've penned this.
Who's it a wake-up call to?
It should be a wake-up call, first and foremost, to the members of the American Jewish community who vote Democrat, so that they understand, and I say this with deference to them, not ridicule. I want them to understand that this presumption that anti-Israel sentiment is the preserve exclusively of 4 congresswomen, known as the Squad, is not correct. This is actually far more baked into the party. There are similar positions that are expressed by individuals who are vying for the nomination to become the President of the United States out of the Democratic Party. So these are not peripheral views. And when you have 109 or 107 people who are signatories to this, among them Jews, which I think constitutes approximately 45% of the entire representation there in the House, then you have a very significant problem. And the change is afoot, and those who support the State of Israel, who are Jewish, who are within the Democratic Party or affiliated with the Democratic Party, need to realize that they have all of their work ahead of them. I don't call for people to leave the party. It's not within my remit to do so, but if you're in the party, look at this. You've had it placed in black and white before you that there is a movement afoot considerable in size and scope and variance that is opposed to any support, in my opinion, with regard to the State of Israel.
Okay, I want to address this to the three of you, and then what I want you to answer first. Benjamin, I want you to understand, and this pains me to say, the vast majority of American Jews do not feel the way the four of us at this table feel about Israel, or the majority of people watching JBS feel. They feel very differently about Israel and their Jewish identity. And they feel that this letter is the right letter. When you say a wake-up call, I want to hear Mort speak to the fact, for me, there is within the Jewish community, there's a leadership which I believe should be awakened by this letter. But to say it's the Jewish community here, that is traditionally 70% of American Jews vote Democrat, we've been raised from mother's milk. And as you said before, the Democratic Party represents socially many of the values that has driven Jewish life and has been consistent with what our vision is for how you help humanity. And at the moment, the way the issue has been cast in terms of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is, Israel's the bad guy. And the underdog is the poor Palestinian, whom the Israelis continue to take advantage of it. And Levin writes this whole piece about how there's a community of Arabs who lives right next to a community of Jews on the West Bank. They have no water, and the Jews have swimming pools. And it seems as if, therefore, Israel is a brutalizing, colonial, sort of ugly power. And the reason why American Jews tend to be so upset with the kind of letter we see here, the way Jews get upset with the Pompeo-Trump administration policy is, they feel the only way there will ever be peace, contrary to what Thane said, and I probably happen to agree with Thane, but the feeling is that unless the American administration brings the hammer down on Israel in defense of a people who don't have planes, don't have an atomic bomb, don't have an army anywhere near the IDF, that unless America somehow twists Israel's arm, then from the American Jewish perspective that I'm talking about, Israel will never be living and consistent with their notion of Jewish values. And so the problem here is the vast amount of American Jews who vote Democratic will not see this letter as a negative. For me, that saddens me. And it's not like these are bad people, but these are not bad people. You said that as well. The people who see this differently, in my view, they see it because they have been duped. They have been given false information. The picture they see is the one of the settlements that you described. Israel is not the Goliath, and David is the Palestinians. There are hundreds of millions of Arabs, all surrounding Israel with one goal, from the river to the sea. Israel is a tiny little speck. I don't care how powerful the IDF is. Israel is still the David. But that's not how the majority of American Jews see it. Now, I've described what I believe is the truth of the larger American Jewish scene, and I'm concerned that there are viewers watching right now who love Israel, but they feel that Thane went too far, and they don't feel. There are Jews, obviously, who are miserable with this letter, as well 4 of us are miserable, but not American Jews in general. And I want you to speak to that. I want you to speak in general. Now, anything you want to say, you can say. But the context is, you saw this letter. I don't see Jewish reaction to this letter in general. And we will get in one moment to the whole issue of bipartisan support of Israel, which has been at the essential hallmark. It's been a bedrock of American foreign policy, and it seems to be eroding. And if it erodes, it'll be very bad for America and for Israel.
Mark, just before you turn to Mort,
Yeah.
I just want to clarify something. It's one sentence. I said it ought to be a wake-up call. Whether it is or not is a different matter.
Okay. Mort, what's your reaction to all this?
First of all, I blame the lack of understanding of the Arab-Islamic war against Israel and any lack of sympathy for Israel, who's the underdog really here. I blame on Jewish leaders, rabbis across this country, and Israeli leadership for not making clear the truth of the Arab-Islamic war against Israel. For example, they don't make it clear that the Palestinian Arabs have been offered a state since 1937, 8 different times. 1937, the Peel Commission, 47, 48, Resolution 181, a state, 2000, 2001, 2008, even 2014. They turned it down every time. In the last 19 years, they've turned down a state 3 times. Ehud Olmert offered 97, 98% of Judea and Samaria, half of Jerusalem, billions of dollars in aid, and they said no. Jews don't realize this. I asked Ehud Olmert, how could Mahmoud Abbas not accept your breathtaking, astonishing, dangerous offer? You offered him virtually everything. He said, Abbas said to me, you must take out these clauses. We accept Israel as a Jewish state. You must take it out.
Correct.
Refugees can't come back, so-called refugees, Arab refugees can't come back and live in Israel. You must take out. And no further claims. You must take out. And Olmert said to Abbas, well, I'm making a deal. I'm giving you everything. How can I not have a clause that says the war's over, no more claims? There's the proof that, of course, the issue is not a Palestinian state. It's Israel's existence. They don't want a state. When I tell Jews that they were offered a state 3 times in the last 19 years, they don't realize that. When I explain to Jews that there's no occupation, by the way, this issue of dispute, I dispute that phrase dispute. If somebody says that the house I live in is their house, I don't have a dispute with him over my house. It's my house. He's lying. This territory was legally controlled by Britain since 1917, legally under international law. Various legal documents, the San Remo Declaration, the League of Nations, the UN Charter 80, all said that this land is to be allowed to establish a Jewish state, and that Jews have every right to live there and have close settlement of the land. In 48, when the British took the rest of Palestine, only 20% left. 80% of Palestine was given away in 22, 23, finalized in 46. And the Arabs said no in
Given away to?
Given away to Jordan.
Correct.
It was Transjordan at the time. Then finalized in 1946 as Jordan. So there's only 20% left of original Palestine. And when half of it was offered to the Arabs and half to the Jews, and when the Arabs said no.
What did the Jews say?
The Jews said, we accept it.
Yes.
We accept only half. And when the Arabs said no, then they relinquished their claim to it. So there was never a country named Palestine. People don't know this. There's never been any Palestinian kings or queens. Palestine, in fact, is even a Roman name. If this was an Arab country, for God's sakes, why would the Arabs have named it a Roman name, Palestine, after Philistinia, the Philistines, Israel's archenemy? And there's no occupation because it's never been Arab land. And there's no occupation because the Jews have given away, Israel has given away all of Gaza, 40% of Judea and Samaria. That's where 99% of the Palestinian Arabs live. They have their own parliament, their own schools, their own textbooks, their own police force, their own businesses. there is no occupation. They rule their own lives in Gaza and Judea and Samaria in the areas where they live. The only thing that Israel does jointly with them is security. And Israel would not be going into these areas for security if there weren't Arab terrorist groups evolving regularly to come into Israel to kill Jews. So that's what people have to understand. And also people are shocked. They have to understand between 48 and 67, when Jordan controlled all of Judea and Samaria, Gaza was controlled by Egypt, Eastern Jerusalem, they controlled all of it. They didn't set up a state. The Palestinian Arabs didn't start hijacking Jordanian and Egyptian planes saying, give us a state, because that was never their interest. And also we have to understand, they occupied it, Jordan did, illegally. The United Nations never recognizes their land. It was illegal. And in 1988, Jordan, the King Hussein of Jordan, publicly renounced any claim to Judea and Samaria. So what I'm saying is, there's no occupation. This is not Arab land. There's a much stronger religious, legal, historic basis that this is Jewish land. And the very fact that they've turned down statehood 3 times in the last 20 years makes it clear they don't care about a state. They'll take it for free, but if it has obligations to accept Israel, they won't take it. The goal is Israel's destruction, pure and simple. And to say that Jewish communities there are a factor in not being able to make peace, how absurd that is. Why aren't our Jewish leaders making clear that the Jewish communities there comprise only 2% of all of Judea and Samaria and the West Bank? 2%. 98% of that area, there are no Jews. This has nothing to do with any possibility of peace.
By the way, I want to ask you, I got the letter right here. And according to Levin's letter, it says that this has discredited the United States as an honest broker between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, severely damaged prospects for peace, and endangered the security of America, Israel, and the Palestinian people. Has this decision by the Trump administration damaged prospects for peace?
This is so absurd. It's so ludicrous. For 25 years, they've been offered statehood so many times. They continue to commit terrorism against Jews. Why hasn't there been a state for the last 25 years before this document? All this Pompeo-Trump resolution says, policy change says, is it's legal for Jews to live in Judea and Samaria. It doesn't preclude Israel giving everything away if they want. It doesn't preclude anything. Nothing changes except the fact that it's legal for Jews to live there. That doesn't mean Israel can't give it away. This whole document is completely absurd. I might add, by the way, I looked it up. 83 of the 107 people who signed this received funds from J Street, the extremist anti-Israel Jewish group. That's who signed this letter. And this letter is filled with absolute nonsense. They say that Israel demolishes homes of Arabs to have Jews moving into the areas where they demolish. That's never happened. They of course invoke the Fourth Geneva Convention, which has nothing to do with this. The Fourth Geneva Convention is between high contracting parties. Palestinian Arabs are not a signatory, neither is Israel. They're not even affected by it. And it says you're not allowed to forcibly transfer your population into someone else's sovereign territory. Israel never forcibly made Jews move into Judea and Samaria. They did it of their own free will. And it wasn't into anyone's sovereign territory. There was never a country named Palestine. So they invoke the Fourth Geneva Convention, which is completely false. And then they condemn Trump for not giving aid to the Palestinian Authority. All Trump says is, if you change your law that says we will pay Arabs, and they do, to murder Jews, then we'll give you money again. Otherwise, we're not going to be supporting terrorism and murder of Jews. And Abbas said, we will never change this law. And do you know that the more Jews that an Arab murders, the higher their lifetime pension? Where is the world? And where are the Jewish organizations condemning this letter? We at ZOA, I'm proud to say, fervently and strongly condemned this odious, absurd letter. And I haven't heard another single Jewish group that's condemned this letter. And I'll go further. None of the major groups have praised Pompeo and Trump for saying it is legal for Jews to live in Judea and Samaria.
Why not? Why haven't they?
And let me tell you who hasn't. ADL hasn't. AIPAC has said we are neutral on settlements on Jewish communities. We are not going to take a position. AJ Committee says we hope Israel is not going to build because of this. The Conference of Presidents has refused to put out a statement. Why? I believe the reason why is they're petrified of upsetting the Arabs, thinking they kill us, they hate us. This will make them hate us more and kill more of us. I think it's fear. This is what I think.
Fear of the Arabs? But wait, I
Yes.
believe it's fear, but I don't believe it's fear of the Arabs. Do you believe it's fear of the Arabs?
No.
Why do you think it is that Mort points out so many major institutions did not praise the administration's statement and have not just hammered Levin's letter? Why?
It has to do with Donald Trump, I think. I think that these organizations fear that too many Jewish Americans are beholden, loyal to the Democratic Party, and their focus is entirely on defeating President Trump. And to give Trump any credit for anything, all of the gifts that he's given Israel in the last 3.5 years is something that none of these Jewish organizations have done. In fact, if anything, they've been critical of almost every one of these positions, whether it's the embassy move, the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital, the extending the sovereignty over the Golan Heights. None of these Jewish organizations have jumped in and said, wow, thank you, President Trump, for recognizing a historic reality.
And you think if it had been Obama doing it, they would have?
I do. I think that this is something that, President Trump at Shabbat dinners, if there are Shabbat dinners, is, radioactive. And Jewish Americans, with their incredible connection to the Democratic Party, just for the record, as you know, I'm a member of the Democratic Party. For people saying Thane goes too far, Thane is a liberal Jew.
Absolutely.
I just want to keep repeating.
Absolutely.
Mort is conservative. Thane is a liberal Jew. If Thane says these words, we're in trouble. And that's what I want your audience to know. If Thane Rosenbaum shows up on JBS and says what he's saying, something's not right. Because he's not the kind of guy that would say this. Something is triggering those his reactions. So I do think that yes, there's an extraordinary amount of misinformation. Jews themselves, that essay that I wrote the other week from the Jewish News Syndicate on the issue about the Pompeo decision, I wrote it as a public service announcement. You know what it is? It's 750 words. Read it. So the next time someone is at dinner and tells you that the settlements are illegal, you'll have a crib sheet. You can answer, because most Americans have no idea. Most Americans can't find Israel on a map. So I do think that what you're really talking about is a reaction, a visceral reaction against Donald Trump, which may be deserved, but it is a reaction that disallows American Jews to credit him or to appear to be supporting a policy. And there is, we know, a long history of what one would call a tikkun olam, social justice warrior.
Okay, but you're not talking about the organizations that I'm referring to. I believe you're talking about American Jews. But that isn't Malcolm Hoenlein. That isn't some of the major Jewish organizations.
Well, but remember, some of these organizations, like the American Jewish Committee, have bought into the two-state principle solution since Oslo. And I think that there is a lot of concern among professionals that they lost the momentum of whatever they thought they achieved with Oslo I and Oslo II. And the positions that President Trump has taken seems to have moved the conversation away from the two-state solution.
Let me just say, first of all, I dispute your labeling me. I'm a rational centrist. Everything I said is the truth. Truth is not a political position. It's not a conservative position, anything that I said. So I disagree with your labeling of me. And let me say, when Republican George Bush came out with the hideous roadmap, which was very bad for Israel, and when he refused to move the embassy and invoked the waiver to not move the embassy, American Jewish groups didn't criticize Bush for not moving the embassy. American Jewish groups praised him for the roadmap, even though he was a Republican. So I do not believe it is political. I believe it is fear of upsetting the Arabs even more, having even more violence, and having even more trouble.
I just can't believe
that is not.
I can't believe David Harris and Malcolm Hoenlein are worried about the Arabs. about your sense?
I personally believe, I disagree with Mort on this point. I don't think that there's any fear of the Arabs whatsoever. I think Thane is much closer, but I want to go one step further. You're talking about the helm of the American Jewish leadership, and I will name a name, and I'll give you a perfect example of it. You tell me how likely it is that the ADL is going to be supportive of a statement by Secretary of State Pompeo, given the fact that at the helm there's a fellow named Jonathan Greenblatt, who was a political operative prior to taking the helm of where he is right now, on the Democratic side of the party with the Clintons. The likelihood of him, with Obama, with the likelihood that he is going to come forward and be supportive of a statement put out by Secretary of State Pompeo, when it's anathema to what the president that he was working for had to say on the issue, is zero. It's absolutely zero. So it's not born of fear of the Arabs, in my opinion, in that case. And it's also not born, in my opinion, of an aversion to upsetting their constituents. It's in the DNA of the head of some of these organizations. And we need to be very clear about that. That's, by the way, why, to come to Mort for a moment, in my opinion, on this particular issue, Mort has more courage in his left index finger than do a great many other organizations, because he's willing to speak about it, he's willing to give swift condemnation, he's willing to put his name on the line, and I think he takes a lot of hits for it, actually. So, again, I don't think it's fear of the Arabs, I don't think it's concern about what the constituents have to say, I think it's within the DNA at the head of the organization.
The Jewish Democrats supported George Bush when he said, I want to establish a Palestinian state. They supported his roadmap, even though he was a Republican, because the Jews feel we have to give them a state, we have to appease them, we can't upset them any further, or things are going to be worse. It is not political in my view. It is simply because Jews feel they want to help the Arabs, so the Arabs will stop killing us and hating us.
By the way, I do want to make sure, in all honesty here, not all integrity here, the AJC has come out with a statement. It says, the revised U.S. position announced today by Secretary Pompeo relates to a question of international law, which has been repeatedly used as a weapon against Israel on the world stage. And then it says, we hope the policy shift will prompt a long overdue correction in international perceptions. It also says, at the same time, we trust it will not serve as a predicate for increased settlement activity beyond the established blocs, widely expected to be recognized as part of Israel in any conceivable two-state compromise.
Yes, you see, they're saying, yes, it's legal for Jews to live there, but please don't live there, don't build there. It's like I would say, it's legal for blacks to move into my neighborhood, but I urge blacks not to move into my neighborhood.
It doesn't quite say what it says. It doesn't want increased settlement activity beyond where Jews are living
Again,
now.
I think that speaks to, again, Section C, right? They're really saying no encroachment on beyond where you already are, which is this area of Section C that was recognized in Oslo II when the Israelis and essentially with the Palestinians created the Palestinian Authority. And a part of that, I mean, remember, even the language of the Geneva Convention, which the Article 49, is literally thrown out the window anyway after Oslo II. Because what happened in that situation is that the Palestinians were given, they were empowered to have the authority over the vast majority of the West Bank. So that at that point, Israel is there based on a permanent status negotiation, looking forward to that. But at that point, it's not an occupation at all because the Palestinian Authority has the authority over so much of that land anyway.
Well, again, I know David Harris, I know Malcolm Hoenlein, I know how committed they are to the state of Israel. I'm not sure why the President's Conference has not come out with a statement. And I feel at least the AJC has come out with a statement that is saying that what the Trump administration has done is sort of clarify an issue of international law which was used as a weapon against Israel, which was where you began.
We began with me saying the following words. It has been ambiguous from the start the idea of the determination of illegality was never determined by anyone. And because of what was so considered unique circumstances here, what was unique about it? The land, as Mort said, that land was never part of any country. So that in order for the Fourth Geneva Convention to be implemented, it's based on the idea that two powers come into a war, and one takes over a portion of the land or that of the adversary. The Palestinian, there was no sovereignty, there was no nationhood, there was no country, Palestine.
None of that matters.
No, but I do think it matters because
Not when you go to dinner
but that's,
with American Jews. This doesn't. This is what matters.
But
the Jews are in some way brutalizing a poor,
Right.
helpless people, and there is something at the heart of this, and I want you to speak to this. The real point, if you dig and dig and dig and scratch it all away, this is the one question that is still eating away at Jews. The biggest question that needs to be answered unequivocally is to the question, did the Jews steal this land? Because if you speak to most American Jews, what really troubles them is Jews were given somebody else's land. And yes, there was a small, by the way, it was a small, the Jews were enormously outnumbered when the Balfour Declaration was written, and even when during the first Aliyah, there were more Arabs living there than Jews. And Jews came back in waves, in tens of thousands. We came back. We say we came back. The American Jewish liberal says, wait a minute, this was somebody else's land. I don't care if you call them Palestinians. They were not called Palestinians. They were Arabs. I don't care whether they're Syrian. I don't care what, and I don't care if it doesn't matter what the name of this place was. This was theirs. It was their olive tree. It was their house. It was their land. And then the Jews came and they stole it. By the way, they had international cover. Yes, there was the United Nations, there was San Remo, but basically San Remo, and then after the United Nations, out of the guilt of the Holocaust, that's what we hear all the time. The world felt so bad for the Jew, it said, here, take this land. And what they ultimately did was, they said to the Jew, and Mort's right in his historical analysis here, first of all, Transjordan was lopped off, but then the Jew was offered in 1936 and 37. The Peel Commission said to the Jew, you know, we thought this would work, it's not working. The Jews, the Arabs here will never accept you. The only way that we can make this work, Jews, is if we partition what's left. And that's what they said. We will create two states inside the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. And you'll have your state, but you know what? There should be a Palestinian state too, an Arab state, not
And the
Palestinian.
Peel Commission was 95% of the rest of Palestine was given to the Arabs, 5% to the Jews,
Correct.
and they said
the
no.
And the question was, will you share the land? Will you share the land? The Jew says, it's all ours, you know. It was given to us. We have a biblical claim, but okay, we'll share the land. And the Arab said, over my dead body, or worse, over your dead body. And from that moment till now, I argue, that's been the international reality. The Jew has said time and time again, we'll share the land. And the Palestinian says, oh, that's big of you. It's not your land to share. And we're not going to share it with you. And it's from the river
to the sea.
To the sea. By the way, as long as Palestinians argue from the river to the sea, I don't understand how any thinking, fair-minded, liberal American or American Jew cannot say, you've got to side with Israel on this.
It's a genocidal song.
It's a genocidal song.
If you're
but
singing...
now this is, when you strip everything away, that's the issue. Did Jews steal this land from Palestinians? Because I believe that the liberal Jewish feeling is we did, and somehow we've got to make it right. And even if everything Mort Klein says is correct, bottom line, what are you going to do with this poor Palestinian people? And you, Mort Klein, took their land, and so did you, Benjamin. So what do you say?
So first of all, I want to challenge a little bit of the premise again. What you're saying about the liberal American Jewish community is not consonant with my experience with them. It's consonant with my experience with some of them, and others are very well. By the way, you're liberal American,
Yes.
Mark, to the best of my understanding
Yes.
of you.
I am not typical.
You're not typical, but you're also not exceptional. You're exceptional for other reasons. But you're not exceptional because of your understanding of the fact that this is a bit more complex than how you've painted it. Now, I will tell you that it's my view that the impression that liberal Jewish Americans have with regards to the state of Israel as being some sort of conquering entity that came and stole land, that is the preserve more of the younger generation. The older generation, by whom I have been in no small part educated, incidentally, during my travels in the United States of America, do not think that. They're very cognizant of the importance of the state of Israel. They are aware and au fait when it comes to the history of the state of Israel. They understand the nature of a defensive war versus an offensive war. They do not see the state of Israel as having gone in, stolen land, and so on and so forth, nor do I. What they see is something different. What they see is a need to, as you put in your question, resolve this somehow. That's what they now have.
Why do they want to resolve it?
They want to resolve it because I think that they feel a sympathy for the Palestinian Arabs who have coalesced around a notion of peoplehood, by the way, whether rightly or wrongly.
And whom do they believe is responsible for the lack of resolution?
I think in the cases of most people who are schooled on the idea and know it, they understand who is the party of no and who are the rejections. I'm merely sharing with you my experience. Now,
I
the
want you
younger
to come to
generation-
dinner with me. I will
Okay.
bring you to typical, lovely
Yeah.
American liberal Jews. I need to educate you. You see...
I will go to dinner with you if you will then come to dinner with me.
No,
And sit at the same tables.
I would love that.
And I will guarantee.
Okay.
May I
Okay.
give you a perfect example?
Yeah, but I don't, by the way, you understand there's already a self-selected group that's likely to sit with you.
No, not at all. Not at all. I want to give you an example of this. Just last week I was in Chicago, the Windy City. I sat down there with supporters of our organization, Our Soldiers Speak, which, Mort, I want you to know, immediately put out an open statement in support of Secretary of State Pompeo's message. So I want you to be clear we're on the record with that. Didn't hesitate for a moment. Those individuals in Chicago were very, very involved with the identification and building of Barack Obama into becoming a senator and then on to becoming a president of the United States of America. Those individuals are liberal American Jews, belong to the Reform community, proudly so, would state it, would express it. They are very, very concerned about, number one, the anti-Israel sentiment that they're hearing growing in the Democratic Party, very concerned. And they are also very, very concerned that if the state of Israel, which they view as having a legitimate right to being there in the land where it is, does not resolve the Israel-Palestinian or the Palestinian-Israel conflict, then the state of Israel is actually going to be made to pay a very, very heavy price. Now, their children may think something different, but it's not with the children that I sat on this occasion. I just want you to be aware that these fall right into the rubric that you just put on the table. They are wonderful American Jewish liberals
absolutely.
who care about the state, and
Yes.
they get the complexity of this situation. What frustrates them is actually what frustrates me. They want to know what is the policy of the Israeli government on this issue, where is it going, and why is the ground being ceded to others?
Okay, I'll tell you what I never hear.
Please.
And all three of you tell me if I've missed it. I will see Israelis, Israeli intellectuals, even Israeli politicians, write editorials in the New York Times blasting Netanyahu for not doing enough for making peace with Abbas, meeting with Abbas, all the time. I see in Israel Shalom Achshav, Peace Now,
Terrible.
a movement. I see a movement within Israeli society that is trying to push the Israeli government towards what it believes is a compromise with a resolution of the Palestinian conflict. I do not see in the Palestinian world Palestinian intellectuals writing op-eds in the New York Times blasting Abbas for not moving towards Netanyahu, sitting with Netanyahu. I don't see any equivalent of Shalom Achshav anywhere in the Arab-Palestinian world. And what I constantly hear from the same Jews who sit with you is this kind of thing. You know, we've got to, it's up to us. They're never going to do it. We have to figure out what we can give them. And I argue there's not a single Israeli policy that could be changed or implemented. There's not a thing Israel could offer. There's not a thing Israel can do at this particular point in history that will make the Palestinians come to the table. Do you think I'm right or wrong?
I don't know what the Israeli government could do to make the Palestinians come to the table. I do, however, think that the Israeli government could do a great deal to improve its own fortune on this specific subject.
Could anything Israel does or does not do create a two-state solution with the Palestinian leadership that now exists?
It shouldn't be a two-state solution, Mark. The two-state solution is complete, total, utter nonsense. On its face, nonsense as currently understood. That's one of the things that I would like my Prime Minister, who I believe thinks that, who you probably believe thinks that, who the other gentlemen around this table probably believe thinks that, would stand up and say. Now, he may have missed his moment, but you spoke about the idea of the Palestinians sitting pat and waiting. Do you remember you made mention of that? I'm very frustrated as, again, an Israeli by the fact that Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has endless amounts of credits to his name, and who I do not want to see end up going to jail under any circumstances, including, by the way, if he's found guilty. I would like to see him pardoned and we would avoid that heartache. But he's had in the cabinet or in this administration, just consider these names: Donald Trump, Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo, Bolton was there for a while, Nikki Haley, Greenblatt, Kushner, Friedman, Mnuchin. You go a bit further down, you've got Graham and Cruz there, supported from the Senate. That was a moment contrasted with when he had to stand and fend off an adversarial president in Barack Obama, where the Prime Minister of the State of Israel had what's called room to maneuver. And not to luxuriate in that room, but to move the ball downfield, to use an Americanism. And he should have done that on the Israel-Palestinian conflict, not exclusively, but certainly.
Toward what end?
He should have dismissed the idea that the state of Israel seeks to enter into a two-state solution as commonly understood, and he should have suggested
And
an
you're
alternative.
telling me that when you visited the Windy City
Yes.
and sat with these Jewish liberal Democrats,
Yes.
that they agreed with you, they're going to give up the idea of a two-state solution?
Yes.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to. We're going to have to go to lunch.
Yeah.
Okay. When you hear this, if the Palestinian leadership changed entirely and it said, no more river from the sea, no more pay for slay, no, we won't teach math by you kill 2 Jews, you kill 2 more, how many Jews have you killed? PATV will no longer teach children how to stick knives into Israelis' throats. All that's gone. We will not teach anymore that Jews are the descendants of pigs and apes. We'll change everything. Instead, we're going to tell the Palestinian people, you know, the Jews are an extraordinary people who will help us build our own nation, and we should live with them side by side in peace. If that happened, this messianic vision, do you think the Israeli people, because I'm going to ask him in a moment, the Israeli people, so that their grandchild will never have to serve in the IDF on the West Bank worrying about security, will not have to be on the Lebanese border, will not have to worry about rockets coming in from Gaza, would they accept the two-state solution?
Look, your premise is such a fantasy that's nowhere clear.
Okay, but that doesn't answer my fantasy. I gave you a fantasy. Oh, you and I deal in fantasies all the time. I gave you a fantasy. I'm asking a concept. I believe
No,
I believe that most American Jews have the fantasy that there can be a two-state solution. And I'm not, by the way, unlike Benjamin, and I respect his idea of a two-state solution, blah, blah, blah. But at the moment, the entire dialogue, the entire dialectic is predicated on getting the Palestinians and Israelis to accept a two-state solution. And I argue that if there ever were a Palestinian people that would live next to the Jews in peace, there'd be no reason not to have a two-state solution. And the problem is that won't happen in our
The
lifetime.
problem is Islam. This is a religious war.
Right.
When you have the imams
Right.
being taught at
Right.
Al-Azhar,
Right.
genocide against
Right.
Jews, to kill them,
And
to
therefore,
torture them.
and therefore,
That's what we're nowhere close to. It's about
there can't be a two-state solution.
Israel gave away all of Gaza, throw all the Jews out, and you have 25,000
What do you
rockets.
say to this?
Look, Gaza is Exhibit A.
Would you accept a two-state solution in my messianic fantasy? Of
course.
Of course.
And so would almost every Israeli.
I wouldn't.
Almost every.
I know.
You know, this
I
is
wouldn't.
why there was such support for Oslo. This is why there was such support for the Labor government during the 1990s, because the Israelis, you know, look, peace now is a moribund subject. The
Right.
Israelis have no, they would agree with Ben today. Most Israelis look at this in a more clear-eyed vision,
Yes.
which is what's so upsetting about this stupid letter, because this letter is like a showboating exercise. It's not real. It's not based on anything. It's just nonsense. It's wish fulfillment, right? It has nothing to do with the reality on the ground, right? And so the Israelis today don't buy into a two-state solution. They see rockets from Gaza. They see what's happened with the stabbing intifada. They do not see a partner for peace anywhere in sight. And yes, as Mort points out, Islam, certainly, I know you're not allowed to say this in the Obama administration, but it surely looks that there's a very strong connection between terrorism and Islamism, and that the concept of this movement is a war with against the West. And you know who's finding this out? The Germans and the Swedes and the people in France. This has happened all throughout Europe. Thank God we don't see this here yet. Hopefully never. We haven't seen that. But to say that, yes, it's a fantasy, but it's one that I think Israelis would buy into if they saw a meaningful partnership for peace. This is why I said before, one of the things that I like the Trump administration did is that this was the kind of talk that was never undertaken, which forced the Palestinians, again, they walked away again, instead of meeting the challenge. The question is, are you nation builders? Are you statesmen? We don't see that. Show us that you want to be statesmen, and instead of saying, I won't show up to conferences for your economic opportunities, right? The Kushner proposal was that before we get to the political status, let's just deal with the economic status. How about prosperity for the Palestinians? How about your grandchildren will be wealthy and drive Mercedes-Benz? No. I want my olive tree and I want the dead Jews. That's what we're seeing. We're saying, I want my olive tree, not that olive tree, this olive tree, and I want the Jews around their dead, and I don't want to live near any Jews. And by the way, I want Tel Aviv, and I want Haifa, and I want to go to the river for the sea. This is what really one of the reasons why you don't hear about the ultimate deal anymore, is because it became clear to the Trump administration that you couldn't get any buy-in from the Palestinians for anything. They're not interested in anything other than Israel, taking that country for themselves. One of the things that we said, we've been dancing around, but it was said by Mort, from 1948 to 1967, not a single Jew lived in the West Bank. I've said this on your show, and I'm going to say it again in case people forgot. From 1948 to 1967, 19 years, not one Jew was living in the West Bank. And the PLO was started in that era.
1964.
So now, why would the PLO have been created 5 years before the Jews were even in Gaza or the West Bank? Why? Because it was about killing Israelis and taking all of Israel. It wasn't about the West Bank. It was about everything. Every Friday, the marches that are happening on the Gaza-Israeli border. Language is important. They call it, the Gazans, Hamas calls it, the March of the Return. They don't call it the March for Electricity, the March for Economic Opportunity, the March for Airspace, Fishing Rights. It's called the March for Return. Return to what? Return to Tel Aviv. Return to Haifa. We want everything. That's what we're interested in. We're not, because during those 19 years, no one used the word occupation, and there wasn't one Jew there. And all of a sudden, it became an occupation. It became a land grab. The Jordanians had no right to that land. Israel, I'm speaking now as a law professor, has an incredible claim of right to that land. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a two-state solution, but it doesn't mean that it's Palestinian land. That the argument could be very convincingly made by me. Give me 10 minutes to make the argument that the law is there. The Israeli could make the claim that that's their land. But that's not what this is about. And we have to stop the fantasy. We have to look at the cold, hard reality. There is a kind of genocidal hatred against Jews and Israelis. There is a kind of soft-eyed, dull fuzziness, what I would call a moral narcissism, that is in this letter. The narcissism. Oh, look at us. Look at us. We are virtuous people, and we want to restore the land to the Palestinians. Instead of saying, there's not any language in there about Palestinian violence. This is what I was saying before. How did UN resolution, Security Resolution 2334, focus entirely on settlements and not say anything about Palestinian violence? Resolution 242, which everybody invokes, remember what it says. Yes, it spoke of the return of land. Yes, not all of it, because Israel had proven by 1967 that the thin neck between the river and the sea was...
Sorry, just on your point about return land, and in light of your emphasis on the importance of language, it doesn't say return land, it says withdraw from territory.
Exactly.
It's really very different.
Exactly.
And I want you to highlight
Very
different.
important.
And it
Yeah,
also...
very important.
And
because
thank
it does
you.
not suggest that the
Right.
land was...
Exactly. That's why it's key.
And thank you. And
Yeah.
let me just add a more legalistic point to that. That doesn't even use the word the territory.
Correct.
It uses
No
the word
definite article.
territories.
And that was
Deliberate.
Intentional.
Yes.
And
Just
poured over and negotiated.
to be
Yes.
legalistic. It doesn't even say the territory. It says territories. But like getting back to my point, not the return of land, but the territory, this resolution to this dispute, recognizing that Israel is going to have to be able to have more of that land in order to provide security. One of several of the items on that list that no one wants to talk about is the end of violence, the secure borders, the end of violence, and the being able to have peaceable and secure borders.
The end of belligerence.
The end,
Exactly right.
the word,
Yes.
the actual word is what Ben said. The cessation of belligerence. The word belligerence, violence, and the security. It uses the words, the security of the borders. No one wants to talk about that. So if you want to point to UN resolutions, you can point to all, but even in 242, 3 of the 4 main items on the list of what needs to happen was in the control of the Palestinians. And the truth is, they can't control themselves. They can't control themselves. The idea of the violence, the idea of taking back all of Israel is far too tantalizing for them, which is why they simply will not buy in to any of these deals that Mort was talking about. 98% is not enough if it means that there are still Jews in our midst and that they too have a country beside ours. We're not interested in 98%. We're proving that we're interested in something else, which is why when Ben says the two-state solution is ludicrous, it's ludicrous because the Palestinians have rejected it so many times. They're not interested in it. It's a talking point for Palestinians and liberal Jews, but it's not a reality for the Palestinians themselves.
Getting back to the letter, I think that a factor that 107 Democrats decided to sign this letter, a factor for that happening, I believe, is that the major Jewish groups refused to profusely and unequivocally praise Donald Trump and Pompeo for this resolution. If they had done that, if AIPAC and the Conference of Presidents and ADL and AJ Committee didn't have a qualifying statement, came out fervently and strongly for it, I think many of these signatories would have thought twice that the Jews really like this, maybe I shouldn't do this. So I really blame the fact that the Jews didn't come out strongly in favor of this as a factor, a basis for so many of the people who signed this letter.
Three very quick points. First of all, about the two-state solution. I agree with so much of what Thane said. There's also an additional absurdity to it. The absurdity, I'm just saying it as an Israeli so that the voice is present at the table, is the idea of partitioning Jerusalem and vacating parts of Judea and Samaria in order to create a home for another people. It's the equivalent of saying to the Jewish people, you can have peace in the land, but you just have to carve up your heart and amputate your right arm, and everything will be fine. I'm not impressed by it. I think it's an absurd idea. I'd be happy to talk about that if you want to push me. The second thing that I want to say to you is the content of that letter. Very, very dangerous content. Firstly, think of the signatories. The fact that the squad is able to sign their names to a letter like that is indicative of just how anti-Israel that letter would have to be in order to garner their written support. Let's think about that for a moment. We talk about other Democrats who didn't sign it, but look at who did. If it was in any way supportive of the state of Israel, they would not have signed that letter.
Can I just say, to point to Ben's point, because remember, they refused to go on the regular congressional trip.
Correct. Exactly right.
Right?
Exactly
that is
right.
a very good, the analogy there is, I don't want to go on the regular trip.
Yeah.
I want to go on my trip, and my trip is not interested in showing Israel at all. My interest is demonizing Israel. So what Ben is essentially saying, if for them to sign this, to sign on to this...
It has to be antithetical to pro-Israel perspectives and points of view. And the third thing that I will say is, you are absolutely correct. The whole dialogue is about this two-state solution. That's why I, as an Israeli, am asking my Prime Minister, by the way, I don't care who the Prime Minister is, put something on the table towards which you are announcing you are going to work. And failing that, the next iteration of a letter like this will not refer to a two-state solution, Mark. It will refer to a one-state solution, because that is what's growing in popularity on the Hill, and that's what's growing in the university campuses. And also, just to put a quick note, I'm sorry, because words really do matter, the fact that this calls the communities in Judea and Samaria some sort of a threat to the safety of the United States of America is nothing short of a libel and needs to be spoken of as such.
Thank you. Thank you. By the way, again, we're almost out of time. I said before, it has been a bedrock of American policy and a key to the relationship between Israel and the United States, that it's been a bipartisan support in Congress, even more so than the White House. The White House has tended to flip and flop. But there's been bipartisan support for the state of Israel in Congress. There are people now who really worry, I'm one of them, that there's an erosion within the Democratic Party. Now, you and I have sat with Eric Yaffe. Eric Yaffe is off and on with us. And Eric says, no, that's not true. That within the Democratic Party, there's still a very strong a commitment to Israel as ever. Then I see this letter.
Exactly.
And I worry. From your perspective, to what extent? But you do believe that bipartisan support is important for Israel, yes?
Well, I think it's important to have as much support in Congress as possible. But I don't think one should lower one's principles and beliefs to get more of one party to support one's principles and beliefs.
I want both parties to support Israel because they're thrilled to support Israel.
Of course I want that.
Okay.
And by the way...
But it also is helpful. It's good for there to be bipartisan support. And do you worry that this represents a subtle but real shift, not for the Democrats that you went out to dinner with, but within the core of the Democratic Party?
half the Democrats in the House signed this letter. Half. That couldn't have happened 10 or 20 years ago. And they condemned moving the embassy in this letter when it was almost unanimous among the Democrats and Republicans in '95 to move the embassy with that Embassy Relocation Act in '95.
So what's
and here,
it mean?
They're condemning a law that was enacted that was fulfilled.
What's it mean? What's it mean to you?
Well, of course, there has been a strong erosion of support in the Democratic Party for Israel. I can tell you, I know many of the strongest supporters in the Democratic Party for Israel were my friends, and they have changed their tune and say things now they would never have said before.
For example?
And they're afraid, for example, to condemn Ilan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and AOC because they think it'll hurt them politically.
So what does it mean? What's the significance of this?
Well, I mean, we have trouble in Congress. We don't have the support we had before at all. And I'm
So
very
do you
worried
worry
about the platform.
Do you
Yes,
worry
the
about congressional support for the state of Israel?
Of course I am. This letter makes it crystal clear. And the platform that the Democrats will have in 2020 scares me to death. I'm worried what that platform is going to say. And as Thane pointed out, this letter doesn't say one negative thing about the Palestinian Authority, about their rockets, about their violence, about the fact that Abbas hasn't sat down in 10 years to sit and negotiate, about the fact that he names schools, streets, and sports teams after terrorists, that they do posters of Jew killers and put it in all the schools honoring them. It says nothing about that. It makes it look like the whole problem is in Israel, when Israel's offered them a state 3 times in the last 20 years. It ignores all that. No, I'm very worried about the Democratic Party, dramatic collapse in their support for Israel. And what's happened, I'll tell you, among Jewish groups, they have reduced what they're asking of the Democratic Party, so they'll sign on to pro-Israel things. For example, the Taylor-Force Act, AIPAC did not support the Taylor-Force Act for a single year. They wouldn't get on. I called them repeatedly. Because the Taylor-Force Act initially said, if you don't change the law that you pay Arabs to murder Jews, you'll lose all aid. AIPAC started getting on the bill when it was changed that you'll only lose 1/3 of the aid. You see, we reduced our principle and our belief to try and get more Democrats on. And we can't do that because that new law is just too weak and it hurts Israel, even though we got that passed. The only reason all aid was cut is Trump says, I don't care, you're not getting anything if you have this law. The Taylor-Force Act says you'll only lose 1/3. And AIPAC and others have been lowering their standard and saying they still support a Palestinian state in the midst of the fact that the state that was given in Gaza is now a terrorist regime, that Abbas is promoting hatred and violence against Jews and say that he'll never accept a Jewish state. And they're ignoring all that and still saying, we want a Palestinian state. They don't want to tell the truth because by telling the truth, they'll be telling the Democrats and Congress that peace is not possible. That's a painful reality. And that's one of the reasons people still stick to this fantasy, a Palestinian state solution. Notice, I won't say two-state solution. Israel's already a state. It's a misnomer. It's a Palestinian state solution. And by the way, Netanyahu for the last year has been condemning a Palestinian state solution. He's saying there's no possibility of a Palestinian state. He has been saying that publicly.
It's not sufficient. It needs to be clear and explicit.
He has been saying it
He
often
hasn't
enough.
actually. I
Not
would
often
have
enough.
stepped away from it.
Okay. So, in 60 seconds, what would you like the JBS audience to take away from this? What should they learn most from this discussion?
They should learn most that the Palestinian Arabs, as Thane has even said, have no interest in peace with Israel. They want Israel destroyed. Every time they're offered a state, they say no without a counteroffer. They promote violence and hatred. They do posters of killers and praise them. They should understand that that peace with the Palestinian Arabs is painfully impossible now. And they should be supporting Israel, not making any unilateral concessions with this terrorist regime of Mahmoud Abbas or Hamas in Gaza. That's what they should learn. And that Israel should be strong and respond much more forcefully to rockets and terror attacks. They've responded in a very weak manner. If we had hundreds of missiles attacking us from Canada or Mexico, we would decimate Canada and Mexico. We wouldn't tolerate it. Israel hits buildings. They are afraid to respond because the world, they're afraid, will start condemning them. So that's what I want them to take away. Peace is not possible. The Arabs do not want peace. They want Israel destroyed, and that they should support Israel responding with tremendous force if the Palestinian Authority or Gaza continues with rockets and terrorism. That's what they should take away.
Thank you, Mort. What do you want to be your takeaway from this?
My takeaway is threefold. First of all, so that I'm not misunderstood, I'm right of centre on security, and I'm deeply committed to an independent, sovereign, viable state for the Palestinian Arabs. But they cannot have it in Jerusalem, and they cannot have it in Judea and Samaria. I want everybody to know that. I don't want my words to be misconstrued, and there are other options, and you have graciously hosted me for that. Secondly, it's not an erosion that's going on in the Democratic Party. It's a landslide. It's entirely different. In 2016, Bernie Sanders was the only candidate who espoused anti-Israel views. We're now only in 2019. Not only was he the only candidate, he was really the only outspoken member of the Democratic Party who did so time and time and time again. We're only in 2019. You can name, Thane can name, Mort can name, viewers can name at least 5, 6, 7, 8 who are key personalities within that party who espouse deeply anti-Israel views. Here comes a letter now with 109 signatories. This is a landslide. It's not a steady erosion. So be aware of that. The third is I would give a clarion call because, as your viewers may know, this accent belongs to somebody who was born in the United Kingdom. And as somebody from the United Kingdom, I recognize anti-Semitism when I see it. I experienced it systemically, I experienced it institutionally, I experienced it on my own flesh and on the flesh of my brother. And my parents have just moved from England to the State of Israel. My father is 74 years of age, my mother is 71 years of age. I think I've got the ages correct. It's not an easy thing to do. They have done it not merely because of their Zionistic fervor. They have done it because they stand at a point whereby potentially, by way of the next general election, they may have a virulently anti-Semitic, anti-Israel Prime Minister in the United Kingdom by the name of Jeremy Corbyn. And they do not have the time to wait and luxuriate as once they did. And that story happens to be the story, Mark, of thousands upon thousands of Jews throughout Europe writ large. Writ large. From France and Germany and Belgium and certainly the United Kingdom. Now, Jeremy Corbyn shot to prominence in 2015. Nobody really saw him coming. Again, we're just a mere 4 years later. And if Corbyn doesn't win, somebody else with those views will win the next time around. If American Jewry does not get hold of this issue, which is the anti-Semitism, and there are other issues, but the focus of this discussion is this letter. So there are other issues of far-right extremism and nationalism and the failure to condemn it, and I can speak on those. That's not the subject at hand today. If they don't get hold of this issue now, while it's relatively small and weak, then I'm afraid American Jews will find themselves right on the verge of living the life of a European Jew. And I'm not talking about the life of a European Jew during the Holocaust or just prior to the Holocaust. I'm talking about the life of a European Jew right now, today. And what that looks like, Mark, is it means they cannot wear outer symbols of their Judaism in the public street, including right here in Manhattan. They cannot write that the year that they spent between high school and university was in the State of Israel. They'll have to massage the language. They will not be able to wear a Magen David in the university quad. And they will also, most importantly, in the greatest democratic experiment in the history of man, the United States of America, they will also feel that they have inadequate representation within the halls of legislation. And it must not happen on their watch. And in order to avoid it, there needs to be, in my opinion, a reaffirmation of the State of Israel as a central plank, not a peripheral plank, a central plank of the identity of an individual who is at once an American and a Jew and an American. And without Israel central to that, I'm afraid that their future is very, very dubious indeed.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. By the way, I want to check one thing. Did you say that you think that in Manhattan, Jews cannot what?
If they do not fight back against this, Jewish people will end up like their brethren in Europe, unable to occupy in the streets.
Okay, I'm going to make sure we understood. So you've heard Benjamin and Mort here. Also, part of the question is, so what do Jews do? So I'm asking you the same. You wrap it up for us, but somehow build into your answer what you think Jews need to do because of the significance of what this letter says about the dynamic now in American politics?
Well, I agree very much with much of what Ben said. And you know, because I've said for years, since I was at NYU for a number of years, welcome to my world. If you are in a university setting, it's as if you're in London today. So the very picture that Ben paints of what Manhattan could look like, you go to most universities on the East Coast and in all the California state schools, it's like living as a Jew in London or in Paris. Certainly to be an avowed Zionist is suicide. You can't possibly exist on a university campus. I know this because I lived through the level of the condemnation of a pro-Israel law professor is extraordinary. So yes, I agree with Ben. I hate to use a Game of Thrones analogy, but I have actually been saying this for years. You know, winter is coming. This is not the United States that we all grew up in. I believe I'm becoming deeply pessimistic. I see that letter is, when the story is finally written, that letter is going to be part of it. The United States might move away from being a pro-Israel country, from being a country that accepts that it shares values with another democracy in the Middle East, that it's simply just, that this issue opens up the potential for anti-Semitism, which has been buried for decades.
Therefore, what should we do?
Well, first of all, my major remedy is stop ceding the moral high ground. Cut it out. Stop it. Jews don't steal land. The settlements are not illegal. It's not an occupation. Start with that. Stop apologizing. I want to say it again. Jews don't steal land. That's not how we roll. Right? We don't persecute people. That's not, we know about that. So we don't do that. We would do anything to give the Palestinians a future. We gave them greenhouses in Gaza that they destroyed. They don't want that future. Their future is one that's a Jewless area. So stop ceding, because that's the problem with this letter, that the more you repeat the words occupation, illegal settlements, just the general notion of land grabbing, right? This capitulation to a lie has been part of the problem, which is why you have people saying things here that simply are not true, that paint a picture of Israel that is untrue. More importantly, instead of apologizing, if you're an American Jew, point to Palestinian violence. Point to the fact that why do we care about the Palestinians in a way that we don't care about the Kurds? Point out to the hypocrisy. The Palestinians invented terrorism. They've perfected it. It's the only thing they're really good at. That's sad. Why is their occupation the only thing that matters? Why aren't we've just abandoned the Kurds in northern Syria? Remember the Palestinians' history, slitting throats of children, throwing men in wheelchairs off of cruise ships, assassinating an entire Olympic team, hijacking planes, murdering a United States Senator, Bobby Kennedy. And you know my favorite, ready for this? You never hear it. Throwing candy after 9/11. I watched it on CNN. 20 minutes later, it was removed, and you'll never see it again. The Palestinians were throwing candy at 9/11. Stop ceding the moral high ground. Talk honestly about Jews in that part of the world, the historical connection that Jews have to that part of the world. This is not just Brooklyn Jews, and Brooklyn Jews are entitled to live there too, by the way, because it is their biblical, historic, ancestral homeland. Talk honestly about what Israel means as a democracy in a region filled with despots, autocrats, theocrats. You're seeing rioting in Iraq, in Iran, in Lebanon, just in the last few days. Every Arab state is a failed state. The only successful state in that entire region is Israel. That's what we should be talking about at Shabbat dinners. That's what you should be saying at universities. that this is what Israel is about. And yes, there is some sympathy for the Palestinians, but let's not forget their history and what they've been projecting to the world and what they've been showing about themselves. Their utter lack of interest in statesmanship, and they're verging on barbarism, right? Barbarism, let's use the word. Cutting the throats of children, throwing invalid males in wheelchairs off of cruise ships. Who does that? Who does that? Running people over in cars, right? That part of the story, for some reason, Jews are afraid to repeat. And I wonder why.
It has been wonderful to sit with all three of you. I love you all. I could go on and on and on. You all went out of your way to be with me and to sit at this table. Thane, thank you so much. Mort, this program is here because of you. Thank you so much. And Benjamin, that you changed your schedule to be here means the world to me. And we should continue. We'll find a way to continue. The story is an ongoing one, and the insight you bring, I hope people heard, and I hope they've learned, and I hope all of you who had a chance to hear Thane Rosenbaum, Mort Klein, and Benjamin Anthony, that it's in some way clarified some of the issues here. This letter is a very bad letter. And it doesn't matter whether you're pro-Trump, you're anti, it has nothing to do with Donald Trump. This has nothing to do with Donald Trump. And if any Jew makes it about Donald Trump, they're not only betraying Israel, they're betraying themselves. We have a long and glorious history of what it means to be an American Jew. And even conservative American Jews are liberal in many of their social policies and many of their views of what we want to do and how we want to support people in general. It comes out of a profound Jewish connection. And the state of Israel is, the state of Israel is a state. It's a state that's a part of the United Nations. Nobody should be trying to destroy it. The most immoral movement on the face of the planet Earth now is SJP, Students for Justice of Palestine, and BDS. BDS is not an attempt to get Jews to act better on the West Bank. BDS is an attempt to destroy the state of Israel. And every American and every American Jew, liberal, conservative, right, left, Democrat, Republican, independent, none of that should matter. What all should matter is, what do we want the world to be? And we don't want to be a world in which there are people in the United States Congress who basically want to vilify the state of Israel. And will do it because of Donald Trump. Anyway, this will not end with this hour and a half, whatever it was. We will continue, the discussion will continue, the dialogue will continue. And this is what JBS will do. JBS will continue to try to tell the truth. And I'm going to say one more thing. There's a fashionable word these days. It's called narrative. You know, the Jews have their narrative. The Palestinians have their narrative. Okay, you have different narratives. It's not about narratives. You know, at one point, 11th century on, there was something called the blood libel. It said Jews use the blood of Christian children to make matzah. That was their narrative. It wasn't true. It's not true. Jews never use the. It's stupid to even have to answer it. And then there were the protocols of Zion. That's a narrative. And then there was Adolf Hitler, and an attempt to say that Jews are not really human beings. We'll measure their heads, and we'll tell you whether they're really human or not. And if they're not human, we can exterminate them like you would exterminate a bug, a cockroach. You just step on them, and then you throw them into a furnace. That was a narrative. I don't believe any of you, I don't believe any American would want that narrative to be treated with one degree of respect. Not the blood libel, not the protocols of Zion, not the Nazi attempt to exterminate every Jew living on the face of the earth. And sadly, this is the human tragedy. There is a people that's enslaved right now by an Islamic ideology and a corrupt leadership that would rather have, as you heard Thane say, their children live in squalor rather than live in a world where there is a Jewish state of Israel. And when Mahmoud Abbas talks about a two-state solution, it's not a two-state solution that includes a Jewish Israel. There's no Jewish Israel at the moment in the Palestinian mentality or in Mahmoud Abbas's heart, and I use him symbolically. He's just a figurehead. But he represents at the moment a Hamas, Fatah, Hezbollah coalition that is Islamic in basic fundamental ideology that says if it's Muslim land, if it's ever been Muslim land, no infidel can ever have sovereignty in it, especially a Jewish infidel. And therefore the tragedy is there can't be a two-state solution. There can't be, whether one accepts Benjamin's construct that even if they have a state, it shouldn't be on the West Bank, or whether you go with what has been a traditional, we'll share the land since 1937. It can't exist if the other side only argues from the river to the sea. And for all of my wonderful, liberal Jewish friends, they're not the same as Benjamin Meats, who say to me all the time, Israel must be better. Israel must do what's necessary to protect the underdog, in this case, the Palestinian, because that's what Jewish values demand. There is something so fundamentally wrong in your understanding of what this world is. Painfully wrong. I wish everybody at this table wishes we could make peace. Not one person at this table wouldn't rejoice if there were peace between the Israeli and the Palestinian. But if there isn't, one shouldn't lie. And as Mort said, this is a lie. Thane said, this is a lie. Benjamin said, this is a lie. And I like what Thane is suggesting. It's time for the American Jew, especially those who understand this is a lie, to stand up. And we can't be afraid. Never again meant we will never again be afraid. Never again doesn't mean there shouldn't be another Holocaust. Never again means if the Jew is ever threatened, we will not be silent. And no Jewish leader of any organization on the Jewish scene today should be silent. We pledge to never again. Never again means never again permit the anti-Semite to bring the world down on us with a pack of lies, vicious lies. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed hearing the perspectives of Thane and Mort and Benjamin. I hope you'll be in touch with me to express any thoughts of your own, whether you agree with me or you disagree. You can always email me at rabbigolub@jbstv. I love it when you email me. And if you want to be in touch with Benjamin or Mort or Thane, you email me and I will forward your emails onto them and they will answer you. My special thanks as always to our director Sloan Copeland and to the producer of this edition of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. And we're especially pleased to remind you that thanks to a generous matching gift from the Cayley family, every new or increased dollar you donate to JBS will be worth double to JBS. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please, indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.